joined a company called Ultimate in 2022. Before that, I didn't really have any contact with Solana at all. I was coming from the Bitcoin and the Ethereum space, so I was like, hearing all the FUD and the bad things that people say about Solana, so I was kind of skeptical. But the more research I did, the more I realized like this is actually a legitimate blockchain. It's permissionless. It's as decentralized as the other blockchains, I would say. We'll talk a bit about what that means in a second. So I wrote a piece called Why Solana is More Decentralized Than You Think in July 2022, which features a lot of the data that we'll talk about today. And what do you know, 2 weeks later, the Solana Foundation released their own validator health report for the first time. So I'll give myself a pat on the back for that. So yeah, what is decentralization? Why is it important? There's no one definition, but basically, you don't want your blockchain to be able to be tampered with or, brought offline by any governments or hosting providers or natural disasters or wars or whatever might happen in the world. You want your blockchain to continue running so that people can continue using it for financial services or whatever they're using it for. So the basics, proof of stake is the consensus mechanism that Solana uses. It's very common. I guess proof of history is kind of the Solana unique flavor of proof of stake, but it's it's proof of stake. Basically, you've probably heard of Bitcoin, which uses proof of work. So basically, you want to disincentivize people from doing fraudulent things or making fake transactions. And the way you disincentivize people on Bitcoin is you force them to do a certain amount of computational work and effort and spend some electricity to be able to validate transactions and put blocks on the chain. On Solana, we make people put their soul at stake, and we give them rewards for doing a good job of validating transactions. There's no slashing, so you can't actually be penalized for doing fraud like you can on Ethereum. But basically the idea is for you to attack a network like Solana, you'd have to get a lot of SOL tokens, so probably over half of the SOL tokens, which would be very expensive, at which point is it really worth attacking the network because those SOL tokens are probably going to be worth less. So there's no real way to 100% be sure that no one can attack the network, but we can make it super expensive to the point where there's no reason to do it. Hopefully that's a good enough explanation. So validators are the machines that are listening to transactions, they're communicating with each other through a peer-to-peer network, and they're putting those transactions in blocks, and they're communicating, hey, I vote that this block is legitimate, I've checked all these transactions to make sure that they're not fraudulent, and I'm going to add this block to the chain now. It happens randomly, so a validator is chosen based on how much stake they have, but it's all random. It's determined ahead of time. There's something called a leader schedule, and that's how we determine whose turn is next, basically. So why are Solana validators controversial? The machine you see here in someone's hand is a very small Intel NUC type of PC. That type of PC is good enough to run an Ethereum validator. Ethereum and Bitcoin have always been about people running nodes from their homes, ideally even mining and validating from their homes. But Solana, we chose a different route. So we went down the intense hardware route. There's a lot of data on the network. Basically, we're throwing hardware at the problem. So our validators are servers. They're in data centers. Maybe some really, unique individuals have these in their houses, but most of us do not. That makes Solana controversial for the Ethereum people because running a validator, you kind of do have to, start a business. It can't be something that you can do as a hobby from your home. So, yeah, it is what it is. So the basics, decentralization. I would say that we want good geographic decentralization. So we don't want all the validators in the same country, in the same city. God forbid, in the same data center. Data centers do catch on fire. Cities do have, natural disasters or civil unrest. Countries do have, regulatory things that change, wars, etc. So we want there to be validators all over the world. We also want them to be with different hosting providers. We don't want everyone to be hosted on Amazon, for example. If Amazon decides they don't like Solana tomorrow, then that might be a problem. And we want good distribution of stake and tokens. So we don't want all the stake with a small number of validators. Because those validators would be chosen again and again to validate transactions. Why does decentralization matter? I think I've covered that a little bit already. I'm going to try to fly through these slides because the most interesting ones are at the end, to be honest. So yeah, the number of validators, we're around about, I guess, 1,700 staked validators. There's another, 1,000 odd unstaked nodes. So this is quite good. You can see it kind of plateaued during the bear market, which isn't a surprise. But to give you context, ahead of time, this is really old data. I gave this talk last year, so this is from last year. But to give you a sense, like most blockchains probably have somewhere between like 50 and 200 validators. Usually it's by design that they have like a limited number. So Near, for example, 100, that's a round number. Cosmos 175, that's a round number. So a lot of blockchains actually limit the number of validators that can be on the network because if there's too many, there's more transactions or there's more peer-to-peer traffic going around and things get a bit messy. And Solana is very messy. So yeah, TLDR, we have like 10x as many validators as many other blockchains do. Let's talk about geographic decentralization. Half of the validators are in the United States. That's not ideal. The other, 1/4, I guess, are in Europe. So, there's a big reliance on US and European infrastructure here, which is not ideal. So that's something that can be improved. Ethereum, by comparison, looks pretty much the same. So US and Germany make, 2/3 of all validators on Ethereum. So this is kind of a general problem in blockchain. I wouldn't say Solana's any better or any worse. Here's the cities you can see. So there's a lot of validators in London, Dublin, Tokyo, Vilnius. So these are probably places with really big data centers from, Amazon, for example, in Dublin. I'm assuming most of that's Amazon. Stake distribution. So this is a linear chart of, each line is like one validator and how much stake they have is on the left. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's 5 million is the first number and 10 million is the second number. So there's a handful of validators with 10 million or 5 million stake, but it's a very long tail distribution. So the biggest 5 here are Coinbase Cloud with 14 million, Figment with almost 9 million, Ledger with 8.7 million, and then 2 anonymous validators, which is interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Sam.
So this is the same chart, but just logarithmic. So you can see most validators have like around 100,000 Solana stakes to them. We'll talk more about this in a second. So the orange portion here on the left, we have a number that we call the Nakamoto coefficient, which is basically the top 30% or 33% of stake. How many validators is it staked with? And that number 33% is important because if 33% of stake goes offline, bad things start to happen. So it's basically like how many validators would need to go offline before bad things start to happen. In Solana, the value is around 20 right now. So there's 20 validators who have 1/3 of stake. This is better than a lot of other blockchains. It's worse than some others. Before you ask me what is it for Ethereum, it's kind of hard to compare with Ethereum for reasons I won't get into, so we won't compare with Ethereum. But I would say 20 is definitely an acceptable number. If you think about like 20 different businesses or 20 different pieces of infrastructure that would have to fail for bad things to start happening, that seems pretty unlikely. It could be better, but it could definitely be worse. This number's actually decreased over the past year, so it used to be around 30. I think the reason you see it decrease so quickly around about here, you can see my cursor, is I think some of the funds from FTX and Alameda, when that all happened, they ended up getting staked with Figment and Coinbase, which were already the biggest validators, so that actually caused that 33% of stake to further concentrate with the big validators. So.
Since last Christmas, Coinbase went from 6 million stake to 15 million, so that's a big, yeah. Yeah,
so the size of the Coinbase validator tripled, according to Chris. Hosting providers. This is something that's pretty important. So, I mentioned already that Solana validators are run in data centers, and they're very intense, BP computers. They're using a lot of data all the time and a lot of power, and they need to be cooled. So not everyone likes having Solana validators in their data center. And Hetzner, it's against their terms of service for you to do crypto stuff with their infrastructure. That was never a surprise, but there were people that still, ran validators on Hetzner because it was cheap. And about 1/5 of all Solana validators got turned off on the same day. all the Hetzner validators in November of 2022. So that was pretty bad, and it shows you, a fifth, like 20%. That's a big number, but not enough to bring the chain offline or something. Again, this is why we need good decentralization. So that's an example that's unique to Solana, something that I think we should not forget. So you can see today the biggest hosting providers are Latitude, Amazon, and TerraSwitch. There's a long tail. By the way, a hosting provider is just someone who basically rents you hardware and infrastructure and gives you power and connectivity in the data center, so you don't have to install your own machines like the safety facilities guys do. They'll talk a bit more about that and why that's maybe a good thing to do. So yeah, I already kind of gave you the breakdown. The good news is here, the gray half is other. So there's not like one hosting provider that makes up like half the validators or something like that. So I think we're doing okay here. Ethereum, by comparison, only about half of the Ethereum nodes are run on hosting providers. The other half are run on residential IP addresses, so in people's houses, like I mentioned earlier. So for the half that is hosted, 42% of that is on Amazon. So that's about 21% of all of the Ethereum nodes are on Amazon. So, I don't think it's a danger, but it's not ideal. The only reason Amazon's not more popular for Solana validators is just because it's so expensive for big servers like that. But on Ethereum, you can run a pretty low power, cheap machine, and Amazon's just cheap and easy to use. So client diversity. Some of you may have heard this news at the end of January that Solana Labs is actually spitting out another developer shop called Anza, and they're basically forking the Solana Labs client, and they're going to work on a new client, and they're calling it Agave. So basically the idea here is that currently there's one Solana Labs client. The client is the software that the validators run, which does all the validator things. And if there's a problem with that client, and all the validators are going to have the same problem, and the whole network has a problem. So the idea here is that we need more clients. We need diversity of clients. So if there's a problem with one client, it's not that all validators are affected. So Solana Labs is spinning out the second client. There's already another client being developed called FireDancer, which is being worked on by Jump, which is quite a big player in the space. They've been working on it for over a year already, I think. There's also a fork of the Solana Labs client called Cheeto, but they don't really count. I won't get into that now, but basically the idea is to have at least 3 clients. I mentioned that the 33% number is important, so if one client has an issue, then the network can continue to run. We have had some outages where the mainnet, Solana blockchain has stopped confirming new transactions. The most recent one was in February, so not too long ago. It was only 4 hours and 46 minutes. It had been almost a year since the previous one. In 2022, there were 5 different outages. So things are improving, but it's still not acceptable that we have outages at all. Obviously, we want to have no outages. I think the end game here is that this is a screenshot from an Ethereum website, clientdiversity.org. They have a number of clients. They're still fighting to kind of reduce the biggest clients and increase the smallest clients, but this is kind of where we want to go in Solana. We want client diversity so we don't have big problems like we've had before. So I'm just going to briefly touch on validator profitability. I mentioned that I gave this talk a year ago. A year ago, this is what that chart looked like. So the number of validators was increasing, even throughout 2022, throughout the bear market. And I did this chart last year, which was basically that the majority of validators were unprofitable. So that red line was basically like the break even. And I was pretty worried, like, what does it mean for a network if the majority of validators are actually losing money and not making money? I wrote something about this, and Marinade also adjusted their strategy to consider this. The good news is today things are very different. And actually, like today and this week, it's pretty unprecedented what's happening on Solana. So if you think about block space as like a limited, this is kind of my Ethereum brain talking, it's not really this way on Solana, but if you think about block space as a limited commodity, where you have a block every so often and it has so many transactions that can fit inside of it, then if you are filling up those blocks, basically you're going to need to pay fees to get your transactions into the block. And this is what we're seeing happen. So this is an article from yesterday, 2 days ago, from CoinDesk. Sol cost of $200 as meme coin frenzy bumps demand for Solana networks. So we're around about 2 million active wallets. Like I said, like today and this week, like everything, like numbers are going up like crazy. So traditionally we've been at 1 million, now we're at 2 million. Ethereum, for comparison, is around 500,000 active wallets. There's about 7,000 new tokens coming online per day. So, shocked Pikachu. The top chart, the red is the non-voting transactions. So there's about 800 non-voting transactions per second, and maybe like 1,600 voting transactions. So the voting transactions, the validators actually have to put transactions on chain to vote on the validity of blocks. So the non-voting transactions represent like actual economic activity, so we should focus on those. There's about an 80% success rate according to Solana Compass. So 8 out of 10 transactions are succeeding the first time they're made. There's no mempool on Solana, so transactions either fail or they succeed. And yeah, there's different ways of measuring this, but basically the way that it works is like a block on Solana has a maximum amount of compute that can be consumed. And according to Solana Compass, about 80% of, it's hitting like 80% of maximum compute continuously, basically. So like blocks are almost full. The largest compute unit consumers are Jupiter v6 with about 40%.
Max, come a little bit here. Yeah, there you go. You're blocking the view.
So yeah, Jupiter is a DEX aggregator. So basically that means like trading on chain is consuming about 40% of Solana's compute units. Whirlpool 10%, SPL token 12%. So yeah, there's a lot of DEX trading. There's a lot of tokens being created and traded, and that's pretty much what's filling up the Solana blockchain. Half of all transactions have additional fees these days. This is interesting. So the blue line is the mean, and the red line is the median. This is fees. So on the left side, the first number is 10 cents, and the second number is 20 cents. So the red line is pretty much still at 0, which means that the median transaction is still paying, basically nothing for fees. But the mean is way higher, right? People are paying 10 cents on average. So basically, there's some transactions that are paying way more for priority fees, which is dragging up that average.
Where's the difference between mean and median?
Yeah, so median is just like the middle number. Like if you just, and mean is like the average. So basically, like there's some people are paying a lot for transactions on Solana. Most people aren't yet. Fees are reaching $5 million per day, which is completely unprecedented. This is DeFi Llama. I just zoomed in a bit here. So literally in the last 4 days, like we've seen fees go from like $1 million a day to like $5 million a day. And Solana price hasn't been increasing that quickly, so obviously it is increasing. So with $5 million a day, people are paying. The Solana blockchain is consuming more in fees than Uniswap and Bitcoin and Aave. It's about a third of what Ethereum does every day. So Solana is becoming, one of these blockchains where like you have to pay to play, which I don't think we've ever seen before. So yeah, coming back to validator profitability, it's beautiful to see that the validators actually earn block rewards. So these fees, half of them go to us. So we are definitely profitable now at a much lower break even. So I made this last week. This is already out of date. So this was for $125 Sol. Sol's like $200 now. And this was for 0.01 Sol reward per block. And it's now already like 5x that. So pretty much all validators are break even. They're making profits, at least for now. We don't know how long this will continue for. Like I said, it's completely unprecedented, so I'm also kind of at a loss here. As Sol holders, there's something interesting that's on the GitHub. So this is a SIMD, a Solana improvement document. It's called Reward Full Priority Fees to Validators. So right now, priority fees, half of them are getting burned, and half of them are going to the validators. So as the priority fees have been increasing, the amount of Sol getting burned has also been increasing. It's about 20,000 Sol per day is that second line here. I haven't done the math on like whether this will significantly impact the inflation of the Solana token. But it was a little bit concerning to see this kind of like come out of nowhere, because it means that we wouldn't be burning that other half. Obviously, as a validator, I'm extremely biased because I would make twice as much money. But as SOL holders, I think it is good that there's some burning of SOL going on. So if we did away with that, it might not be bullish for the chain. But that's something that's still being discussed, I guess. Yeah, that was pretty much the end of my talk. I tried to fly through it and leave time for questions. Obviously, we can talk, today and tomorrow and the rest of the week and the rest of the month. So, but yeah, thanks for your attention, and let me know what you want to ask.
What would you, in a hypothetical scenario, let's say that all of US Solana validators need to be turned off, for tomorrow, maybe like a 24-hour heads up period of okay, all Solana validators in the US need to fuck off. What would happen?
Yeah, so I mean, this is assuming that you can't unstake them that quickly. If you could unstake them that quickly, it would probably be fine. I mean, I'm not qualified to say that, but the problem is the stake, right? So, half of all stake is with US validators, and US validators turn off tomorrow, you lose half of all stake, and that's a big problem. So the limiting factor is how quickly can they be unstaked? If people knew the validator they're staking with was going to go offline soon, ideally they would go and change it over. But right now you actually have to wait until the end of the epoch before you can even do that. So it's a two-day minimum, depending on where we are in the epoch. But yeah, I think regulatory stuff is what I worry about the most in terms of geographic diversity. I'm not worried about nuclear war or something as much as I am worried about the SEC and what they've been going after exchanges for staking and earn programs and things like that. That being said, you can't really go after all validators. I think it is pretty obvious for a hosting provider like Hetzner. If you look at who the biggest consumers of power are in the data center, those are probably your guys. But it's not anyone could shut down all validators tomorrow because they don't know who they are, they don't know where they are. So
yeah. Do you think the biggest the top 20 could, if they're in the US, they could just spin up a copy outside of the US and then migrate their accounts, right?
Yeah, you could do that. You can move your hardware from one physical location to another.
Yeah, if it's bare metal, it's hard. It's difficult, but
yeah, that would be possible. So I mean, yeah, if you're a good, responsible business and you see that there's going to be problems, you can move for sure. And the same facilities guys will talk a lot more about the hardware stuff in a second. So
yeah.
Do the fees go to anyone else other than the validators?
No, half get burned, half go to the validators as block reward. I mean, there's MEV, which is kind of a bigger topic, which is a lot more complicated. But yeah, if we're talking about priority fees, yeah, this is how it works. It's pretty simple. Yeah, so MEV on Solana is still pretty small. That said, I haven't looked at it since last week, so I'm sure it's changing quickly. I think H2O does have a good dashboard. Yeah, I didn't include any MEV in this slide. Yeah, H2O is the only one that I'm familiar with. So H2O is the version of MevBoost on Ethereum. So they're basically trying to make it so that everyone can collect MEV and it's distributed fairly, because that's the only way to kind of fight the problem. At least that's what's happening on Ethereum. But yeah, last I checked, MEV was still pretty small for H2O validators. We're not earning hardly anything from MEV. Most epochs last week we earned 0 from MEV. We run H2O, but maybe that's changing, and I should probably look at the data again. Back there?
How does Solana avoid mempool?
Yeah, so Solana doesn't have a mempool, so transactions either fail or they succeed. I'm not really technical enough and familiar enough with the blockchain protocol itself to give you a good answer there. But I think there's probably a timeout on the transaction where if it doesn't make it into the next slot, you basically have to resubmit it. That's my understanding. You should probably ask someone that's smarter than me. Andy?
Why Austria?
Why Austria? My co-founder is from Vienna, and yeah, he's it just made sense for us to co-found Monster. All right. Thanks for your questions, and yeah, look forward to the staking facilities, guys.
Okay, so we're gonna have their talk, and then at around 2, we're gonna have fun.
The outside light?